So the appeal verdict is finally out, and a silver lining for the seven players individually, but otherwise the punishment for the Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia and the players have otherwise remained the same. First, that little good news for those seven players who were John Irazabal, Hector Havel, João Figueiredo, Gabriel Palermo, Facundo Garces, Imano Machuja, and Rodrigo Hogaldo. These seven players are now allowed to continue training and play for their respective clubs in friendly matches. But with immediate effect, they must serve the remaining 8 months of their 1 year ban, which actually began on 25th of September 2025 when the FIFA Disciplinary Committee imposed those sanctions on these individuals after they were found guilty in falsifying the documents that allowed them to turn up for the Harimau Malaya in international matches last year. And this particularly included two AFC Asian Cup 2027 Group E qualifying matches with against Nepal and more pertinent and more crucially against Vietnam on the 10th of June, where all of them, all seven, were involved in that 4-0 win against their Southeast Asian rivals at Bukit Jalil National Stadium. Hector Havel was also involved in the Tigers' opening win against Nepal in the 2-0 win at the Sultan Ibrahim Stadium in March last year. Now, with the guilty verdict upheld, it means that with immediate effect from the 5th of March 2026, these seven players must serve out the remaining 8 months of their suspension, and this having considered by the Court of Arbitration for Sports Appeal Committee led by Lars Hugo of Denmark and assisted by Jose Luis Andrade of Portugal and Massimo Cosia of Italy. The three-man panel had decided that these punishments were appropriate for the offences they had caused due to due to their complicit involvement in the forgery or falsification of documents that gave them clearance to play for Malaysia national team. And before I go on to the details of that minor victory and the suspensions that these seven players were to resume, I will zoom in a little bit more on the other sanctions that are upheld. That means they still stay as it is after the appeals to the FIFA Disciplinary Committee or Appeals Committee was unsuccessful last year, and now with the Court of Arbitration for Sports or CAS, which has upheld the remaining of these sanctions or punishments, as we call it, by the World Football Governing Body. So, in a recap, as a result of those the ineligibility of those seven players involved in a number of international matches for Malaysia last year, Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia or FAM, they now have to pay the 350,000 Swiss francs in fine to FIFA, which is more than 1 million ringgit, rough or more, when it comes to currency conversion. And for the seven players, they also each have to pay $2,000 Swiss francs in fine and complete the remainder of their 1 year sentence. Now, why do I say the remainder is because in I think in January this year, on the 26th of January, they were actually given a lifting of the ban so that the players can train and play for their clubs as part of the stay of execution imposed by the CAS as they deliberate the merits of the appeal. And during this period where they deliberate those merits of the appeal, João Figueiredo, John Irazabal, and Hector Havel resumed training and playing for Johor Darul Takzim, the Malaysian champions, while Gabriel Palermo transferred to Kuching City and has since made a few appearances for the East Malaysian team. Now, with that ban, all these four players, plus Facundo Garces, who remains at Alaves, Rodrigo Holgado, who has signed for a new club in South America, and Emmanuel Machucha, they all now are not allowed to play official matches. But the silver lining is they can remain at their clubs, they can continue to train for their clubs and play in unofficial matches, which means friendly games for their clubs, no problems. For example, if Johor Darul Takzim wants to play a friendly, cross the causeway and play against, say, BG Tampines Rovers, yes, these three can play in that friendly against Tampines Rovers and there will be no sanctions. Similarly, for Gabriel Palmero, if Kuching City decide that they want to cross the border just to play a friendly with, say, Bruneian club Kasuka, they are able to do so, and Palermo is able to appear for Kuching in that friendly. But if, for example, again we're using Johor Darul Takzim and Kuching City in this case, if both these clubs meet in either in Liga Super Malaysia or either of the Piala FA Malaysia or Piala Malaysia match, these four players will have to sit out until, I think, the remainder of the 8 months of the 12 months ban, considering that these 4 months have been served. That will mean that these four players plus the other three cannot play in those officially sanctioned matches which is endorsed or which is confirmed by FAM. So in this context, from 5th of March this year until 5th of November, all 7 players cannot play any official matches. That means Facundo Garces cannot play in any La Liga match or even Copa del Rey for his current club until the 6th of November this year. The same applies for Rodrigo Holgado, who cannot play in any South American club competition, never mind the domestic league games that he will be involved in, until that date, 6th of November. The same applies for Hector Havel, John Irazabal, João Figueiredo, Gabriel Palermo, Emmanuel Machucha, also until the 6th of November 2026. Yes, this is the date where the 1-year suspension will officially end. If anyone is wondering why I'm talking 6th of November, is simple. During that 2-month period where there is a stay of execution, which means that 1-year ban was temporarily suspended. That means there's no such ban in place during these 2 months. The players were allowed to continue training, resume training. They are allowed to play competitive matches, which the 4 players earlier I mentioned, Irazabal, Figueiredo, Havel, and Palermo, or Gabriel Palermo, they were able to contribute to their respective clubs. Now this has been paused again, but they can play friendly matches. They can continue training with their respective first teams. No issue on them training. They can be photographed training, but they just cannot play because that FIFA ban is now back in place. And why did I say the state of execution? Because in legal terms, this is where it's going to be very, very specific. A state of execution in legalese or legal language or jargon, that means this ban does not exist during this period when the appeal is being considered by a higher court. In this context, that would be the CAS. And when the CAS deliberates on the appeal, the combined appeal from FAM for both the organization and the seven players, there was a prima facie. I mean, in this Latin term, it means they are looking at it on the surface and they believe that these seven players were unfairly punished for their role where their careers were severely disrupted. I think this is what I believe CAS had looked at that angle and believed that these seven players should not have been allowed to stop training during that period when they served their suspension. In this context, for the individual player, that is a sign of relief. At least he can continue to earn a living by playing the game through training and playing in those matches during that period. In this case, João Figueiredo, which I said yesterday or last night, after they after Johor Taksim defeated Sanfrecce Hiroshima of Japan in the AFC Champions League Elite Round 16 first leg at the Sultan Ibrahim Stadium, I was saying that Figueiredo had shown back the best of form after taking a number of games and several training sessions to adjust, and he was going back to near his best, and he was clicking well with Bergson and Marcos Guilherme. But now this has been paused again. Stop. So now it's back to Gyro or Bergson, Gyro Bergson combo with Marcos Guilherme or any other combo in the front three or front two, depending on how Cisco Munoz is going to play. But Figueiredo will no longer be part of this tactical consideration for the rest of this season, and at least at the start of next season when the competition, domestic and club and overseas club competitions resume again until the 6th of November 2026. And in this context, where we look at the third paragraph, I mean the third last paragraph from that press release, where it says, I think in that part, with credit for the period from 25th of September 2025 until 26 January 2026 included, where the ban was effectively served. That means 12 minus 4. These 4 months were served. The 2 months under the stay of execution does not count. So that means these 7 players still have to serve 8 months of the ban. The rest of the punishments stay the same. Now at least the 7 players individually can breathe again. They are at least allowed to train. They are at least allowed to play friendly matches. They may not be as match sharp again when they return to competitive action after the 6th of March 2026 or from that date onwards. But at least they are still able to keep fit. They are still able to get their football instincts alive on the training ground and in these unofficial games. But competitive league, cup or overseas matches that is officially sanctioned by FIFA or AFC or CONMEBOL for those, or even in Facundo Garca's case, it would be the La Liga. No, tidak. They all cannot be featuring in those matches under their purview. Tak boleh. Never mind ever thinking of playing for the Malaysian national team. That said, and all that said, now, the 7 players I've already talked extensively. Now, what about Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia, which is now effectively currently under a normalization committee led by the current Secretary General Noor Azman Hamzah in that former normalization committee, and having known that the previously elected executive committee have all collectively resigned. What happens now? Well, apart from paying the 350,000 Swiss francs in fine, worse is to come. Given that the appeal is overall unsuccessful for the organization, that means harsh punishments will await for the Malaysian men's national team. But first, the first minor good news is this. Because of the normalization committee, Malaysia will not be banned from playing competitive matches by FIFA and AFC. That means the Harimau Malaya can still compete in this year's ASEAN Championship, or better known as the AFF Hyundai Cup, which will be held between July and August this year after the FIFA World Cup. That is the minor good news. The age group teams for the boys and the girls and the women's national team can also continue playing without any fears or repercussions of punishments. Now, what about the men's national team taking away the ASEAN Championship? What is pretty evident, and already I think the big hint from FIFA when it reversed a number of friendly results where those 7 players were involved, it's pretty clear that AFC will follow suit and will declare that 2-0 win in March last year against Nepal, and especially that 4-0 win against Vietnam in June last year, they will be overturned into 0-3 defeats due to Malaysia fielding ineligible players. This means after the revision of results, Malaysia will now sit second in their group on 9 points. But with Vietnam technically set to win all their group matches, including the reversal of the defeat, Vietnam will now automatically qualify for the 2027 AFC Asian Cup Finals in Saudi Arabia. So, what does this mean? That means the 31st of March and final qualifier against Vietnam, Vietnam against Malaysia, it will be a mere, you can say, dead rubber. That means there's no consequence. Whether Malaysia win 4-0 again or a draw, it does not matter anymore. Vietnam have already qualified. It's over for the Harimau Malaya in their quest for back-to-back Asian Cup qualification. Then after the ASEAN Championship, what next? Will FIFA and AFC pull the sledgehammer on Harimau Malaya on the competitive front? Would it be a case of a repeat of the sanctions that was thrown at Timor-Leste more than a decade ago over how they fielded a busload of ineligible Brazilians to play for the national team over in the main internationals and the under-23 games? Possible, but you have to wait for how the AFC in particular is going to react, because these offenses occurred in an official AFC international tournament or qualifying tournament in this context, and thus it is likely possible that AFC will decide that Malaysia will be excluded from the 2031 Asian Cup campaign, having seen the precedent done on Timor-Leste. Is possible, but it is also likely that Malaysia at worst will be totally disqualified from the Asian Cup for this cycle and resume attempting to qualify for the 2031 edition. That's one way of looking at it. Or finish this round in the dead rubber against Vietnam and ban Malaysia from the 2031 Asian Cup qualifying, which can be a bit tricky, because what if in a few years' time, given the current formats of the joint World Cup Asian Cup qualifying campaign, what if Malaysia reaches the third round of World Cup qualifying for 2030. That will that will open up a few one or two rather awkward situations, because based on this context, based on according to how the last two qualifying campaigns have occurred, Malaysia will not only, if in this example, will be allowed to play in the next round to continue their World Cup dream, but they face an awkward situation where, because of that sanction in place by AFC, that they cannot actually qualify for the Asian Cup even if they have qualified on merit. That means technically, in the next international cycle of joint World Cup Asian Cup qualifying, all Malaysia can only do is dream of the World Cup. Piala Dunia, not Piala Asia. Tak ada. So that is not very comforting news on this front. Then what about the officials involved or those involved in this whole scandal? Chances are many from that from the immediate previous exco, they may not appear again for re-election or another campaign to go back into the office at Kelana Jaya at the highest level decision making body. Very unlikely given their complicit indirect role in being part of this scandal. So with all due respect to the playing legends who were in that exco, the Pahang and Malaysia icons Datuk Dola Saleh and Datuk Zainal Abidin, it is pretty hard for them to be involved again at this football managerial level in the executive positions. Now, all said and done, we can see that already FIFA has set a queue for AFC to follow. They had already overturned those friendly results involving those 7 last year. AFC is likely to follow suit, and I think most damning of all, Malaysia is now most likely, I think you can say 99.9%, they are out of this 2027 Asian Cup finals. They will have to watch on TV while they see Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam, and possibly Thailand and the Philippines fly the flag for Southeast Asia in next year's Asian Cup finals in Saudi Arabia. That will be the reality. Tiong Khoo, Arif Aiman, Corbin Ong, and the rest, they all, Sihan Hazmi, they all will have to watch on TV. That is the reality that the Malaysian national team players will have to face. Then what about Peter Flemowski's future now that the appeal has largely failed for Harimau Malaya? It is possible that he might leave the job because part of his success in what was actually an unbeaten 2025 was down to his excellent man management involving the players he had at his disposal, and without those 7 after the suspensions. Will he finally be fed up to say, I'm done, I quit? Or will ASEAN Championship be that one final tournament swan song where he will try to lead Harimau Malaya to glory and show that he can do it even without those 7? That it was more on how he could organize and command the loyalty of those players that he had selected or had been selected for him to play for him and his coaching staff and for Harimau Malaya, and as well as technically the national team facilitator Tunggu Ismail Ibn Sultan Ibrahim, the regent of Johor and owner of JDT. That could be that litmus test for him if he decides to stay for at least the next few months for this big assignment. And given their group only has Thailand as the real serious rival alongside the Philippines, potentially the Philippines, the semi-finals is possibly a target. if they are allowed to play in the ASEAN Championship, which AFF is unlikely to stop them from playing. And where Flamowski, if he stays in his role, will fully focus on it. But otherwise, it is harder to say beyond that next few months whether Flamowski is willing to wait for a barren period before the next World Cup qualifying and Asian Cup qualifying cycle begins for Harimau Malaya. I think this year the ASEAN Championship could well be that swan song in Flamowski's reign, which otherwise a brilliant reign that was tainted by this scandal that has serious repercussions for Malaysian football, damage to Malaysian international football reputation, and ultimately you can say how Harimau Malaya, Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia is viewed not just around the world but in Southeast Asia as a whole, and a significant case study in future sports history textbooks on how not to cheat illegally by using foreign mercenaries to play for the national team for which they have actual no lineage from at all. And that's, I think, is where these repercussions are going to come, at least in the short term, medium term, and it will probably take a new generation, perhaps with Arif Aiman by then being a senior statesman and a few others, to lead this Malaysian team back from this latest blow in Malaysian football history or pride or heritage as they call it. And with that, given that the punishments have remained intact, it's a minor victory for the players where they are allowed to keep their rice bowls. But overall, I think a beginning of a series of chain reactions, negative chain reactions to come for Harimau Malaya and for Persatuan Bola Sepak Malaysia, who are now really at the mercy of the Asian Football Confederation to not be too hard on them, however unlikely it is going to be. So if anyone have your views on what you think on what is said about this verdict or just say about this verdict, you can leave your comments, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram or TikTok, on what you think about this.